All right, guys, we're going to be getting started in just a second. Thank you for the turnout. Yeah. Cool. So there are sign-in sheets going around the room. Please make sure to sign in. We really appreciate it. It allows us to get food like this. You'll notice there's salad. You should really thank everybody at Silence, especially our speaker today, Ben Dankers, for allowing us to have this great food. That said, there are a couple of things that are coming up this week that you guys need to know about. The first one is Scale. I can't spell. Okay, it's close. It's close enough. Okay, so Scale is happening this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. How many people here are going? Okay, keep those hands up. How many people got my email? Okay, did anybody not get those emails? Okay, cool, so we're good. The email that you have says that on Saturday at noon, we're going to be doing a group photo. Please, please bring your Swift shirts that day. We're going to be trying to take over the center of the conference hall and doing the largest group photo that they've probably ever seen. It should be a lot of fun. Now, we want everybody to have their Swift shirts so we can identify you guys and make sure it looks really cool. If you don't have a Swift shirt or you have a medium because the new shirts haven't arrived yet, please just wear a black shirt. So everybody should be good there. Now, if you have any questions, I'm here. I gave contact information, so you should be good. I hope to see everybody there. And if you have any questions at any point during the conference, please do not hesitate to contact us. That said, we're going to be starting this Friday the training, the Linux trainings that we talked about. This week it's going to be web services continued. The group is almost full. We have 8 people, I believe, right now. So if you want to go, make sure that you sign up soon. It's on our Facebook group. If you want to go, they will listen to whatever you want and do different trainings depending on who's attending. So it's really cool. It's really personalized training. I can't stress that enough. You didn't like the huge groups. This is going to be 6 people for as long as you need. And we're going to be doing this weekly. So the same stuff will be going on if you're going to Scale, but if you're not going to Scale for whatever reason, you can do that as well. And we'll be happy to follow you. With that, I want to introduce our speaker today. He's from Silence. His name is Ben Dankers. He's going to be presenting on some cool stuff, cybersecurity war stories. These are generally the cool things that happen in the industry. If you're not sure if you want to do cybersecurity, if you want to do network security, network administration, these types of stories will help give you an idea of what the industry is like. And with that, I think I'm going to let him get started. So let's give a round of applause.
So, pretty easy presentation today. By show of hands, how many people here are interested in security consulting? Okay. Network security, network administration, application security. Okay. All right, cool. That works. My background is in network security. I'll kind of get into that in a little bit. How many of you have heard of Silence? Like 4 people. That's better than you. All right. So, who's Silence, right? So, most of us came from big companies. Silence is relatively a new startup. We started, I say relatively because we've been in business for about 3.5 years. Most of us came from the Boundstones, the McAfee's, Cisco, and we came together with this idea. And this idea is to basically be a next generation product or replacement for AV. Have any of you guys read Hacking Exposed? Hacking Exposed, okay. So Joe, of course. Stuart McClure. So Stuart McClure, who is our CEO, he was the CTO of McAfee previous to starting Silence. And he would refer to himself as the Chief Apology Officer. Okay? Because he would be, when McAfee or a product wouldn't work, that McAfee would send him in and he'd have to apologize to the CISO or the CEO, and kind of help understand why the product failed. After doing this for a couple of years, as one can imagine, he got very, very old, right? And so he decided there has to be a better way. And so him and a gentleman by the name of Brian Prima, who was the chief scientist of McAfee, met together in a garage and decided, hey, how can we improve upon this? How can we become the best next generation product? Okay. And so really, what do? Okay, prevention through artificial intelligence. And how do we do it? Is anyone here familiar with the Human Genome Project? DNA, like mapping DNA, right? So that's the easiest way to describe this, is we take executables, understand what makes good software and what makes bad software. So there are features of an executable that are deterministically good, right? So we know that if it's signed, typically that may be a good thing, right? If it's unsigned, bad. And so there's millions and millions and millions and millions of these individual features. And what we do is use artificial intelligence to model against those features to identify what actually is making malicious software bad and good software good. That all boils down to an algorithm, runs on the endpoint. If it's good, it allows it to run. If it's bad, it blocks it. No signatures, no heuristics, static feature extraction. And if you guys have questions throughout this, feel free. I mean, this is interactive, so I want you guys to participate. If you have something, feel free to let me know. So what do I do? Well, identify risk, right? So that's primarily my job. A little bit about my background is I've been with Simon since the beginning. Previous, I was at Pound Stone for 9 years, been at Guidance Software. 15 plus years in security consulting. My core focus is penetration testing, risk assessments, forensics, that type of stuff. I hack stuff. The most common question when someone asks me, well, what do you do? And I kind of think about it for a second, is realistically my answer to them on most cases is something like of the following. Okay, has anyone here heard of the candle problem? Candle problem? Okay, so the candle problem is when you're given a candle, a box of tacks, and you say, okay, I want you to put this candle on the wall. And most people attack it. The similarities are pretty common. So they try to attack the candle on the wall using the tacks. Light it on fire, it melts. All right, so they try to make a little using the tacks. They try to make like a little shell to hold the candle on. Right? It doesn't work. Right? Now the solution to this problem is you take the box that's holding the tacks, you tack the box to the wall, and you put the candle in the box. Right? And so that's all security consulting is doing. Right? Specifically, when you talk about network security, and when you assess them, the environment has all of these different technologies, right? They could networks, applications. They have all these different processes. How does a person get a username? Right? How does a person? How are the main admins, checking or doing updates? All of these different technology pieces fit together, and it's your job to figure out how to best utilize them to provide value and identify risk. Make sense? So, kind of the agenda here. It's loose, but really, I want to kind of give you guys an idea of some of the case studies. So these are examples that I've worked with, been involved in, or have firsthand knowledge. So we're going to talk about a couple of different clients. Obviously, needed to change. All of our work is under NDAs. I don't like getting sued. It's not fun. But I'll give you an example on airport, financial company, auto manufacturer. We'll do some IR case studies on Cartbridge. We'll do some Death by Microsoft. And really, these are stories that kind of get you excited to kind of understand when I go in or when one of my guys goes in to do an assessment, the types of things that we're paid to do. Right? I mean, we're paid to hack them. It's a lot of fun. At the end, I'll talk about what I think is the next big concern. Right? So what is on the forefront? What keeps me up? All right. So enterprise security services. I have a picture of what is that? Crown jewels, right? So every organization has something that they consider to be their crown jewels. And it is your job as a security consultant, if you're doing a pen test, to identify what that is and identify ways to access that. Now, depending upon the focus of the assessment, whether or not it's an internal assessment, whether or not you're doing a social engineering assessment, the method of going about stealing, so to speak, the crown jewels may be different. Okay? But ultimately, as a business, they're doing something to provide, they're making money. Usually it boils down to a couple of different things. So, the secret sauce, right? The Coke ingredient. In some cases, PII, personal identifiable information. Does anyone know what this is from? I'm dating myself. Trading places. So be more intentional, right? So if I know something really bad is going to happen, and they're trading commodities, and I have access to that information, I can make a lot of money, right? If I get caught, what happens? I go to jail because it's insider trading. I have, information that hasn't been released. But those are the types of things that can make a potential impact on the customer and that they care about. And this isn't, there's a lot of other things. These are just kind of some generalities to start thinking about what does an enterprise care about. And ultimately, it's going to be different, right? It's going to depend upon what they're doing and the service they're providing. And so let's talk about some case studies. Okay. So these are all kind of, they expand. I didn't pick all of them from this year. Some of them go back, so some of them go back a couple of years. But ultimately, these are each individual different assessments that I took away something and I learned something from. Either to become a better security consultant, to just open my eyes to risk in general. The airport. So this is probably 10 years ago, 9, 10 years ago. It was one of my first engagements at Foundstone. Okay, so they sent me out. I was hired, sent out. Go do an internal penetration test. Is anyone familiar with what an internal penetration test is? Should I go over what penetration testing is? Okay, so I'll go over what penetration testing is. So penetration testing is where I go in and I pretend I'm the bad guy, right? So I'm going to go in, try to identify vulnerabilities. I'm going to try to exploit those vulnerabilities, and then I'm going to try to get access to what? Back up a slide, the crown jewels. And so it's my job to work with the client to understand what does the airport really care about. So in this case, the airport had roughly somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 hubs, right? So that's networks, so that's servers, switches, routers, that's devices, right? Plugged into the network. In addition, they really cared about accessing flight information. They cared about financial information. This particular airport did hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue a year. If you impact that revenue, obviously, that's what causes layoffs and other bad things to happen. And so if you're able to embarrass them or show that your data is insecure or that data is compromised, to the point where they have to pay for your LifeLock or your all of that insurance. That ultimately is free to you once your information gets compromised, but it's money to them. So they're paying millions and millions of dollars in fines, whether it be regulatory compliance or something, right? And so at the end of the day, they want to be secure. Now, this one is actually really special because prior to this, I was doing mostly forensics. And, after college, I had a different expectations as to what business casual was, right? I had my own definition. And at that time, business casual to me was jeans and a polo and I was good. So I show up to on-site. I show up to on-site to my first meeting ever, right? So I'd never done work with Foundstone before. I'd never done work with this large of a this type of client. I had no idea. And I stroll in my jeans and my polo, thinking, okay, this is good. Like I got this. First thing I ran into is my project manager at the time, and she has a shit fit, right? I mean, she's just like, what are you wearing? And at this point, like I have my own definition. Like that, we said business casual. Like, this is what business casual is meant to be for the last 10 years. Jeans and t-shirt, it's casual, business. I got it colored. Like, what more do you want? Needless to say, I was corrected rather quickly. Okay, but those are the types of things that I have experience with. Hopefully, you're smarter than I was. But those are the types of things that when you're going out and considering consulting that are important, right? Customer facing. You can be an amazing technical. You can have an amazing technical ability, but if you're not customer facing, what good are you, right? If I'm hiring consultants who are going to go represent, they're the face of the company, and so there has to be a certain amount of expectations in terms of how they dress, how they interact, and all of this is very important. But it was just funny because, needless to say, guess what I never did again? Showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, pull-up. Okay. Anyone know what this is? Besides Ninja, really cool Ninja. So it's a Metasploit. It's all a Metasploit console. Does anyone know what Metasploit is? Okay, so we got a couple of people. So Metasploit is, think about it as an application of payloads, right? So when you go and do a pen test, The first thing is, what is the first thing that you want to do? Identify a vulnerability, right? So you identify a vulnerability. After that, you want to exploit the vulnerability. Well, in order to exploit the vulnerability, you need to have exploit code. And Metasploit is essentially a tool that allows you to do that, right? So it provides you with shell access, and it provides you with basically a database of exploit code that you can use to pawn and pillage your way throughout the network. Find vulnerabilities. So exploiting the vulnerability, right? So we use Metasploit to exploit the vulnerability. At any given time, I would be shocked. So well, let me take a step back. Who wants to guess what the percentage of times I go in and plug into a network, do an internal assessment, or do an internal pen test, and I'm able to achieve domain admin? Everybody know what domain admin is? Okay, so basically the highest level of privilege on the Windows environment. Who wants to wager a guess in terms of percentage of success?
90.
Okay. What's another one? 80. Okay. It's actually right in between those two. It's 85% out of every single, and I started tracking this a long time ago. 85% of any time I go in and I plug in, I'm able to get domain admin. Okay? And as a network administrator, as a lot of you, that shit's scary, right?
Yeah.
It's very scary. Now, for those, and I would say that other 15%, they usually fall into one of two categories. Either I was restricted, it was a small environment, meaning there was only 5 or 6 systems, or it was a new environment, meaning they had just purchased all Windows 7, so there was nothing legacy in the environment. And if I go back in 5 years or 4 years, do that same assessment, now they have legacy stuff, which means, all you gotta do is miss one, right? If you're 99% secure and you have 2,000 nodes, 1% is still a pretty big number of possible targets. Pillage. Now, don't ever put pillage into customer-facing reports, obviously. This is more like, the anatomy of the attack. How I got domain admin, or how I was able to, circumvent your security controls, and this is the result. What did I actually get? What is log? Pillage is log. Yeah. So, and keep in mind, and from a psychological perspective, up to this day, right? So this was my first big day, and my first big new job, right? And so I was super excited. And so, I literally, at that night, I can remember, I had dreams of Oracle exploits before going into work, right? So, I was ready. Of course, I was a little upset when I got in and I was yelled at for my clothing choice, but, it is what it is. I've got thick skin. Arrived on site at 9 a.m. What I didn't put in is I got yelled at 9:15, but plugged into the conference room at approximately 9:30. Knew where to do the domain controller, so first thing I did, I just all right, well, where's the domain controller? Let's figure this out. I had the enterprise domain admin by 10 o'clock. And I'm so there's I'm jumping for joy at this point. Because I roll in, I'm the new guy, plug in, I am the, I was ecstatic. And then I realized, what am I going to do for the next week? Because here's the thing, right? Is for everything that I find, I've got to write a recommendation. And so when I find domain admin at the beginning of the week, that means there's going to be a lot of recommendations. And so what people don't miss, or what I didn't realize, is what's just as important as your ability to provide that technical expertise is your ability to write. Okay? Report writing, huge in consulting. Anyone? Why? Why do you think report writing is so important when you're doing security consulting?
People have to be able to understand what you found and how you have to basically dumb it down to something they can understand, not with the technical.
Sure. And the deliverable.
Yeah.
So, an average is, so if I were to guess, right? And this is, kind of a broad range. What you're talking 10,000 for a small assessment. It could be 7 figures for a large. And so if I go in and I hack them 7 ways from Sunday, and I don't provide them with anything of value, or if I don't express, or if I don't show them how I did it and what remediation efforts that they can do in order to fix it, what good is it? It doesn't provide them with any actual value. So, needless to say, you probably won't be able to do this. But From there, I mean, basically, I took domain admin. I was able to enumerate. Other networks, other segments. I was able to identify credential misuse. Number one issue in organizations: reusing passwords, especially like shared accounts, admin, whatever. You know, and with that level of access, I was able to get clear text passwords and all that fun stuff. Ultimately, what happened was I was able to use those, and they have this little cool PCI network, right? And so you guys actually have something really similar, because I did an assessment many, many years ago. So you have enclaves, right, or essentially enclaves. And so all of your regulatory types of enclaves. And so you have like serious security controls, you have VPNs in place, you have all of these different types of technologies that are protecting this data. Well, and this particular place had two-factor authentication, which is impressive because, like I said, this was 10 years ago. And so they had a jump box with two-factor authentication. Problem was the network administrator, or one of the network administrators, had a soft token on his desktop. And so I was able to compromise his credentials, use his soft token, generate the key, log in over the VPN, and have access to all of their special fun stuff they're trying to do. So that's one thing, right? And we're talking in the space of a week, right? I mean, I don't have months, or I mean, our engagements aren't months or years. If you're an advanced persistent threat, how, you know, or I mean, if you go by the latest statistics in Verizon, it's something like 285 days before you realize that you've been owned. It's impressive. Any questions on that? Okay, so that was kind of the first part of the assessment that stood out to me. The second part is social engineering. How many people know what social engineering is? Okay, some more people. All right, so for those who don't know, it's basically manipulation, right? So I have consultants who really don't like doing this because they feel really, really bad about lying, right? And about having to manipulate someone to the point where, you know, getting to do something they want to do. Others excel at it, like scary. It's just, you know, it's like if they, you know, one step over and you might not be. I mean, you're riding that line kind of deal. So, a couple of key parts. Dress the part. Okay. Meaning, if you're going to go into a professional business, right, and you're trying to pretend to be somebody such as with authority, right? Don't go in t-shirts and jeans, right? Dress the part. Have a good reason. Excuses are great. One of my most successful social engineering tactics, really, it involves phishing. So it's kind of a two-part exercise. It involves phishing and telespoofing, right? So telespoofing is essentially the ability to, when I call you, or when I call you, I can show you what number, or I can spoof the number that I'm sending you, right? So like bill collectors, right? So that's why they need references, so that, you know, if I have your mom's number, right, or your dad's number, and you're not paying your bills, I'm going to pretend that I'm your mom or dad calling you. You're most likely going to answer, right? Same concept. And so what happens is you create a fictitious email. So you do something that looks obviously bad, right? So you have your victim in mind. Maybe she's the expense lady, right? So you say, hey, I'm unable to open this expense report, and it's named, you know, something really funky. It's a zip file. You send it to her from an obviously fictitious email, and so she gets it. Okay, so it's right in her inbox. Next thing you do, if they have, you give her a call, right? So immediately you send it, and immediately you give her a call. You can spoof the company's name. You can, if they have a direct IT support number, you can spoof it. You say, hi, you know, Miss Victim, right? I just noticed that, by the way, an email came in 2 minutes ago with this subject and with this title, right? Don't click on it. And of course, you already clicked on it, right? But what are you doing? Well, you're establishing trust, right? So you have trust. So this lady, she just got this clearly bad email, and then 2 minutes later, a minute later, she gets a phone call. She looks down at the number. It's from within the company, or maybe even if you get lucky, she can recognize that it's IT calling. She picks it up, and immediately you're trying to save the day and you have some story about, oh, this circumvented our email filters, right? It's a keystroke logger. I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Boom. Done. And how effective this is, Gary? I have actually done that particular assessment on CISOs. So a board will come in outside, so like, you know, like the actual board will want to do an assessment on their security group, but a whole, it's powerful. So always have a good reason. Confident. As soon as you start struggling, you know, or if you're not confident, you're not right in their face, or you're not really very clear on what the task that you want them to do, they start raising doubts. If you don't give an option, you don't give them time to think about this, or whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea, you know, chances are they'll do it and be a smart. You know, there should be, number 4 should always have a smart. Like if you're creepy in a trench coat, less likely to get results. Just probably goes under dressed. So back to this airport. So this was my second part. So this was week 2. I come back in, I understand how the airport is, I understand the layout. We have a polo shirt, which is ironic because he yelled at me the first day I wore a polo shirt. And a red phone. I remember this red phone specifically because I always see, when I see this red phone, like all the movies with the president on a red phone, you know, NORAD or something, right? Like something bad really going to happen if that phone rings. Well, in this particular case, this was, so there was no limits in this particular airport, which hindsight there probably should have been some limits, but it was pretty much a free-for-all. And so the target that we picked was essentially the control tower, right? So you had like a control tower, I don't know exact flight status, right? And literally all we had to do is we figured out what vendors they use. So we understood, okay, they use McAfee products, they use Symantec products, blah, blah, blah. And luckily, most of us have swag from going to conferences. We had a couple of, in this case, it was McAfee, which we actually were employed at McAfee, so made things a little easier. McAfee put those on, said, hello, yeah, you let us up, we're here to do maintenance. No problem. Open the door. I mean, this is for, I mean, but it was literally, in my mind, it was like this. This is flight control for a space shuttle, but same concept, like, and everybody is so focused on their, like, you just walk in and you're there to do a job. Now, I should mention, for these assessments, right, we have permission, okay? There are get out of jail free cards. Especially with social engineering, people get pissed. And so I've done assessments like in banks or high security areas where guys with guns come and drag you off, right? And so what's interesting is sometimes you can show them this get out of jail free card and let you off. And then you write them up still, right? Because they let you off, because most of the time they don't verify. So I could have just had something working with the CEOs, but you didn't actually call the CEO or you didn't call the member on to verify. You just assume that I was supposed to be there. Then there are other times which they don't even want to hear it, and it's like thrown up against the wall, put on the little zip tie handcuffs, and you just gotta wait it out. Okay. Any questions on kind of social engineering, or we'll call it the airport scenario? Nope. Okay. Show me the money. This happened this year, which once I get into it, it will blow your mind. I just couldn't believe that even in this day and age, simple problems like this still exist. But it's a testament of, you know, understanding and being diligent in this case here, SDLC, software development lifecycle process of making sure your stuff is secure. So let's go through the application review. So when we do an assessment, we talked about doing an internal pen test, right? Basically, I plug in, I scan everything, I find the vulnerability, I exploit the vulnerability, I continue exploiting the vulnerability until either my time is out or I have something about it, okay? Application security is a little different in most cases. It's more focused on identifying vulnerabilities than it is identifying paths to kind of the pillaging, right? So expanding your influence. That makes sense. So when we're looking at an application, these are the kind of areas that we're going to go through. First, we have to discover the application. We have to know exactly how it's working. So we spider it, and we go through and we understand, you know, okay, what parameters are what, you know, how does it work, what configuration settings are there, you know, did they forget anything, you know, silly, so to speak. We walk through this, right? Authorization, identity session management, and so on and so forth. Business logic is important too, as I'll come to. But these are all different areas when we're assessing an application that we look at. So the target in this particular case is a mobile application. So send and receive money with this application. And it would not surprise me if some of you have actually probably used this application, either the mobile or the web. Very popular. Hundreds of millions of dollars these companies worth. And essentially, like I said, we need a mobile app. It was an Android application, but it was essentially a mirror of their. You could do the same exact type of activity on the website as well. But we were focused on, the risk was focused on the Android portion. We found the golden goose. Joe, essentially, we could, as it says right here, so we would be able to send money for X. So say, I want to send you, well, I could change that. I could say, well, I'm going to send you $5,000 and you're going to receive $5,000, but I really only want to lose $1, right? Yeah. It reminds me a lot of like when I was a kid. It's like bargaining with your. I've got kids now, but when I have 3 or 4 brothers and sisters. Yeah, I'll give you 1 piece of candy, you give me 5. But it's the same. It's fair. Right? That's what I got. And so, like I said, this was 3 or 4 months ago. So turn $1 into however much money you want. Step 1, deposit $1 into your account. Okay. Step 2, send money to a friend, preferably one that you trust, because they're going to get a lot of money. Modify the send money request parameter. Now, as developers, it's important to be, to have these naming conventions in order to be able to read through code and say, okay, now if you saw that reading code, send money, what would you think it actually did? It had something to do with probably sending money. So it's probably a pretty important parameter. Okay. Step 4, modify the receive money parameter to whatever you want. And that was all it took. Now, we didn't test it for $1 billion, but we did test it for $5,000. And so there's one step in here that I did not put in. But essentially what it relied on was there was a primary process and a backup process. And the backup process did not validate these results. So if you're able to force the service to use the backup process, didn't go through audit, didn't get validated, money. And so remember that last time I told you about business process. So no kidding, we put in $1, sent 500. I think we did 500, 1,000, and 5,000. Walked to the place, got our money. I'm giving away too much information. But, let's just say no one validated even as they were handing us $100 bills. Wow. Because all I see is up request. But if you would have looked at the logs, if you would have actually seen what was sent, yeah, there's no way you should be getting $5,000. You should be getting $1. So this is some of the cool stuff that you get to see when you start doing security consulting. And I have for every one of these that are up here, because we don't have time, I have 100 just like it. No kidding. These aren't like the best of the best. These are what I thought of in the last couple of days, because I procrastinate just like college students. Step 5, I forgot, buy a small country, right? It's really that simple. Any questions? All right, so another thing that we do a lot in from a testing perspective is embedded device in healthcare. In fact, we have an entire vertical specifically associated with that. Now, my primary responsibility as managing director is I run the pen test teams and I run all of the services teams that focus on enterprise security. Until we got large enough, I had to do embedded as well. Now, how many of you think, so in terms of traditional risk, let's go with this. In terms of traditional risk, how many of you immediately think of embedded devices, your fridge, airline TVs, medical devices, such as infusion pumps, prevent or provide risk to you as either an employee or as a user? So I'll give you an example. Anyone heard of Target? No. No Target? Okay. So is anyone familiar with the Target?
Yes.
So it's So it's basically two-pronged attack, right? You have the kind of social engineering aspect, and then what did they go through? What was the initial, after they targeted the employee, got the username and password, what did they go through? HVAC, right? Because all of that stuff is plugged into your corporate network. And the code is 25 years old. When you put in a PLC, it could cost the PLC being, in other words, devices like from an industrial control perspective, or so oil and gas, those generators, oftentimes they're just plugged right into the network, and they're plugged right into the network. Their code is really crappily written, and they never replace them because the devices themselves cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So it's not cost effective. And so you go into a customer who has all of these devices, and you can start breaking stuff very, very quickly. I have seen Windows 3.14, Windows 3, I've seen Windows 98, all within the last 2 years. No joke. I've seen Windows NT4, sure, no problem. Yeah. Because what happens is, okay, well, it's running NT4, and the risk of compromise is high, but the cost for me to replace this is more than, is basically going to cost me 10x, 100x, 1000x, so I'll just deal with the risk. So if it gets hacked, it's going to cost me 10. So what's the likelihood that it's going to cost, that I'm going to have to pay that out over the course of a number of years, right? So, that's all that is, basic risk calculation. But then when you say, hey, look, it took us 30 seconds from the internet, and this is not small companies. You can see, I'll give you an example. If you Google, right? Google anything, right? Google has the same problem. So, what do they want to protect? Well, this is where it gets dicey, right? Or it's a little different because embedded devices pretty much means anything that's not a computer, right? Or anything that's not an enterprise, what you would consider an enterprise type solution, right? So that could be, we talked about HVACs, medical device pumps, huge. Nowadays, anyone gone into the hospital or been to the doctor's office in the last 5 years, all those devices, embedded, right? Wi-Fi, usually wet if you're lucky. If not, it's unencrypted. It's not an area that anyone's ever focused on because they have been so busy worrying about their PCs and their laptops and servers. But it's huge, especially when could potentially kill someone because you force an infusion pump or you force the pump to deliver too much or too little of a medication. Put it in that terms, right? It goes from, so instead of having a financial impact, right, from a security perspective, you're now concerned about risk of human life. And you have to approach it that way because if you talk to a doctor or someone if you're trying to sell services or products to a hospital, basically they want to know, okay, what am I going to get out of it? Because every dollar I spend on you is a dollar less than I can spend on a kid with cancer. And so if you don't have a really good answer to that, there is a battle. Auto manufacturers. Man, that's kind of blown up. In fact, there's a really big conference out on the East Coast for Department of Transportation today, and this week, actually. This has got a lot of press. And you can thank Chris Valsek and a couple other people who really like attention, right? And so they've really brought attention to this particular issue. Anyone worried about their car being hacked? Why? Because what's that? Look at all the different types of, every one of those is an electronic device that can be manipulated. And that's not even a complete list. It's just a graphic I borrow. Yeah. You have, and so some of these are more serious than others, right? There's one thing about forcing someone to listen to Queen for 8 hours straight by hijacking their iPod that's plugged in, right? But if you can mess with the braking, or if you can mess with the acceleration, again, you bring in the human impact into this. And as an auto manufacturer, you really care about that kind of stuff. Because who's the first person they're going to come to? Them, and sue them for lots of money. And probably win. So, I've done this for very many different types of auto manufacturers. Some of them are, some of them are my best customers, okay? Now, the fundamental problem with when you think of a car is you have this, which is this idea of handguns, okay? And so all of these different peripherals, peripheral being your navigation, peripheral being any type of device, it's all plugged in to the same primary communication channel, for the most part, that operates the criticals, so your gases, your acceleration, your start and stop, okay? And so it's possible, and we've proven it, that you can start and stop a vehicle remotely, right? Because nowadays you have push start with mobile applications. So we're able to hijack that authentication and do it. You know, if we wanted to start and stop it and steal a car, we can do that. No problem. If you want to mess with the acceleration, we can do that as well. You know, I mean, there's all these different types of features within a vehicle that you can completely only mess with. And it's very important because some of those, if you impacts on a person in the car or, you know, wherever they're at. And this is a big thing, right? So if you go to DEF CON or Black Hat, there's almost always a talk on this, usually by Chris or Chris Valsek or one of the kind of music forward with this concept. We talked about medical devices. In this particular case, they do this. So backing up a year or so, year and a half, this is one of the first medical device manufacturers that have instituted a rigorous security testing framework into their development. Right? So we're talking like people who actually make the devices. Right? So you have different types of risk, and people have to assess the risk differently. So as a manufacturer of the devices, they want to make sure their primary concern is, well, I don't want to put this into a hospital and be insecure because if someone breaks it, kills the person, I'm probably going to get sued, right, financially. And so a couple of these customers, it was unheard of 2 or 3 years ago to do this type of testing on medical devices. Now FDA has recommendations. There will be processes developed, I'm sure, in the coming years, and regulatory requirements on how devices themselves are to be handled, assessed, and tested. Because we have regulatory compliance with the data, so PI, health information, that type of stuff. But how is this not important? How is it not important to make sure that whatever device you're using can't kill the patient? So hard-coded credentials, common issue, vulnerabilities in software. Again, a lot of these are all best practices. That leads to crappy code, which leads to lots of vulnerabilities, which leads to lots of opportunities to take over the operating system of the device itself. A lot of these devices operate on very custom protocols. So, you know, I mean, I know we were talking with Joe, up there. We're talking about a class where, you know, he was essentially had to, you know, make his own TCP stack, right? Have a device that encode and decode and be able to go through that process. Same thing applies here, right? Because if you don't know what that communication looks like or how to manipulate it, you're going to have a really tough time assessing it, right? Or making an impactful, or providing an impactful report. Because the last thing I want to do, and the last thing you want to do, if you're going to be security consultants, is say there's no risk when there's lots of risk. You eat that, right? That's just fun. Robotic arms. So we tested, this was a few years ago, we tested the ability in surgeries now to have robotic arms that are huge, right? They're huge, that are doing these very delicate tasks. And we were able to, and this was obviously not a real human, they have like dummies that you can do to basically do certain tasks and test to make sure the robotic arm is functioning. And so during, you know, we had the dummy out, and it's simulating a live environment, we were able to manipulate the robotic arm to kill the human. Yeah. You know, and so if that happened in the real world, that's mind-boggling. If you had never even thought about that could happen, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so as your job as, you know, network security engineer, security consultant, whatever it is you're trying to do, those types of things are the risks that you're looking out for and trying to prevent. Okay. So any questions on kind of what I classify as the offensive type stuff? I know we're running short on time. What are we doing pretty good? What's that?
5 minutes.
I'll run through these very quickly. Okay. Instant response. So who knows what instant response is? Basically, it's when your company gets hacked, we come and save the day. Right? Same thing. Heartbleed. So this was like a year and a half ago. It's been a while. Anyone familiar with Heartbleed? Okay. Joe will, of course, Joe. For those that don't know, we hired Joe. He worked for us for a little while. But Heartbleed was really cool. So it was basically you could send a request to memory and you pull out some memory chunks of memory. Okay. Now when this issue hit, it was like, oh my gosh, the internet is going to break. We're all going to die. That lasted for like a day. Okay. And then the patch was pushed out a day or two later, and for the most part, people forgot about it. We had one customer who had their government client. And right at that time, they had an employee who had lost her key fob, right? So she had to use static keys in order to access the VPN. Well, lo and behold, this particular government client has a problem with a lot of Chinese agencies who particularly, put them on a quarterly basis. And right as she logged in, they were able to exploit this vulnerability, gain that hard-coded credential, and essentially, boom, right in. So they use that static key. So now instead of having a random key, they use that static key, go right along it, full access to this government content. As you can imagine, they were freaking out because there was no real way to secure this for a day or two. And so by the time they noticed it, Chinese attacker, domain admin, a bunch of other stuff. And so they're rooted, right? And so once it's rooted, it can be very difficult if you don't know what you're doing to make sure that everything, the attacker is completely out of the environment. I mean, for them, it took several weeks. Death by Microsoft. Microsoft. So this goes along the lines of understanding and identifying that good tools can be used for malicious purposes. Who here knows what PsExec is? PsExec is a couple. So PsExec is essentially a Microsoft tool that has really good administrative functions. It allows you to remotely interact with other services, other computers. Now, if you're an attacker, it's a perfect tool to use in lateral movement. So lateral movement meaning I'm on box A and I want to get to box B. PsExec does that. This customer was in the news. It was big IR last year. And these guys had everything. So these guys had Bit9. Their security budget was that of a small country, it seemed like. So they had every technology available. But they could not stop this, right? Bit9, right? So Bit9, well, this is a valid Windows application, right? It's signed. It's allowed to be used. It's not malicious. But if you're able to compromise a domain admin account and use PsExec to move in and log in and do whatever you want, well, like disable Bit9, guess what happens? You become competent. And so that's what happened in this particular case. And so again, this turned into, and so they're a credit card processor. They had millions of dollars in fines that they had to pay because they weren't compliant and Visa sued. Not to mention the impact of finding out that, okay, just the process, just from a business process perspective, they can no longer accept credit cards, right? Because Visa said, no, you guys are compromised. We're good. You lost that privilege. And so at hundreds of locations and hundreds of different restaurants, they have to get out those little manual credit card processes and hold it. So the last thing I want to do because that adds time to the process. If I want to get in, pay with my credit card, and they tell me, no, we're not taking credit cards, or we've got to do it this way, we've got to do it manually, it takes a lot more time. And so their impact to their business from a reputation perspective, from the perspective of that they undoubtedly lost revenue because it took them so long. And as a customer, I'm not going to wait an extra 30 minutes so you can manually do my credit card. The impact is real. Anyway, I always had to get into zombies somehow. Are we good, Joe? Like 1 or 2 more minutes. Entertainment industry. Dude, they get pawned all the time. And they're big targets, right? So, I mean, I'm sure you've heard like Sony, right? They got those. Yeah. The point is it doesn't matter how large you are and whether or not you think they're a target. PSN, so they were how do I put this? So PSN, for example, originally they had the attitude of why would anyone hack this? No one wants it. Stuff. I go through a serious fundamental reevaluation of security. You get it. So the Russians are attacking. ICS. This is a funny one. There's actually a book on this one. So I'll close up with this one and we'll have some time for some questions. But the Russians are attacking. So this is a few years ago. Anyone here heard of ICS CERT? So ICS CERT is basically a government institution run by DHS that will go out and do basically free incident response for ICS testing. So water, you go to a power company, and you get hacked and you're concerned. Basically, you go through this process, and DHS will send out these people to respond to the IR. My counterpart, his name is Eric, was deputy director of that service, so to speak. And so one day, we got this immediate urgent request that, hey, we noticed this suspicious activity from Russia. Now, in order to get to his desk, it's got to go through like 5 other people, right? So this one had gone all the way up to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you. And they mandated that he's on the next plane out. So he got it. This was right during Thanksgiving. So he flew out to Illinois, middle of nowhere, rode on ATVs to get to this water pump to figure out what is going on. So he looks at it. In this time he hasn't slept in the day, and he's looking at it and trying to figure it out. And he notices that like it's an active credential, right? So he's like, well, who's the administrator of this account? They're like, well, it's so-and-so, right? He's the one that actually designed and built the software. Has anyone actually called him to see if this is valid traffic? Everyone looks. Did you call him? No, I didn't call him. Well, it turns out that this guy who built this interface is Russian, and he's visiting his grandmother in Russia at that very time. But no one had actually called to verify that, hey, by the way, are you in Russia and are you logged into this console? And so it turned into this huge government debacle because think about all the money taxpayers like you and I had to put the bill for last-minute flights, ATV rentals, the whole 9 yards. And simple, in an instant response, simply understanding if you are actually in an incident is pretty critical before you start raising the alarms. But it's a really fun story. And like I said, I think it's because it shows you, again, that not everything is as bad as it seems. Now, with that said, you can find plenty of government malware that has been specifically designed to take on PLCs and that's next, for example. Any questions? So my next big concern is mobile phone malware. We'll release a report probably at the end of the year with some really cool findings. But if you think about it, who here uses two-factor authentication? In some form, right? So in your two-factor authentication, what do you actually use for that second piece? Your phone, right? So if you're able to have malware on that phone and generate that as you're generating that random key, boom, you're done. So I think that's going to be something to watch for. And like I said, I have seen specific examples of nation states using so anyway, so that's pretty much it. I know we're at time, but are there any questions? And feel free to come up to me afterwards. If you have any questions about security consulting or let me know. Like I said, I'll give you the lowdown. Cool. Thanks, guys.
So before everybody goes, I just want to make sure everybody is aware. We are taking memberships right now. If you want to become a member, some people asked, and maybe one along if you need your shirts, please stick around and we'll be going back to the lab and we'll pick them up. And with that, look forward to seeing everybody next week or at the scale. And for the rest of the week.
organization.